Good evening, everyone who are joining us from here in India, and morning to the ones who are joining us from the western part of the world. I'm your host, Mashood, and welcome to dtalks or Disruptive Talks. Um, we have covered some amazing ideas, some truly amazing and disruptive organizations that are transforming and creating change in education, in social economic development of people around the world. And in when we talk about in the idea of disruption, it is truly to kind of transform the idea of a concentration of power, the idea of making lives of millions of people better, such that they have more agency and they have more confidence and are able to achieve the maximum of their potential. And we're not just talking about children, but also adults and young people. Uh, and we are an increasingly young world in terms of our populations as well. And when we are talking about many of these goals, which the United Nations SDG talks about, and we have been focusing on SDG 4 and education so far. But one set of stakeholders which have really contributed to helping transforming education as per the goals of SDG 4 is the sector which donates, is the other people who contribute to education and contribute to development through philanthropy. And one organization and one idea which has really disrupted how how we understand philanthropy, how philanthropy can be maximized at a very large scale. And especially, we are talking about philanthropy for children, for vulnerable children, is the Global Fund for Children. This organization is working in nearly 20 countries in the world and is working with some of the most marginalized communities and focusing on helping children, giving children that chance such that they are able to have a good start in life through good education and through good health, and so that they can be on their feet and make a life for themselves. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome our very special guest. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Fund for Children, and he has been someone who has really been who knows global philanthropy inside out. He has worked in organizations, in kind of building organizations like Global Giving as well, which then has created a huge network of individuals and organizations that have committed to philanthropy for children and for socioeconomic development of different populations around the world. So we would like to welcome Mr. John Hecklinger, who is the CEO of Global Fund for Children, and he is going to discuss with us on the idea of how disruption in philanthropy can happen and has happened, and how we shift the power uh, in the sector of philanthropy, establish trust, and practice mutual accountability. John, it's truly an honor to have you here at the Disruptive Talks, and we're really looking forward to learning from your amazing vision of change. And you've really kind of done things at such a large scale. So really looking forward to understand how we can disrupt in our own areas of influence.
Well, thanks, Mashoud. It's really a pleasure to be here talking about some of the work that we're doing in partnership with many, many other organizations all over the world. All trying to change the way things work. Um, it's something that I've personally been after for a long time, having observed how difficult it is for truly inspiring local initiatives all over the world to just connect with the key resources they need to be able to try new ideas and to innovate and to become more effective in what they're doing. And I guess where I can start is just talking a bit more about Global Fund for Children, because our values and our model are a bit different. We're really trying to do things in a new, not necessarily a new way. We've been around since the early '90s, but it does seem like there's a growing movement that's kind of catching up to GFC and others, kind of novel ideas, back in those days. And I think one thing that's important to point out is that Global Fund for Children, we are not your typical foundation, that works out of an endowment and gives away funds through that endowment every year. We are what you can think of, at least in the United States framework, is as a public foundation. So yes, we are a grant maker, but we raise all the funds that we grant, which I think is kind of important because it structurally puts us in kind of solidarity with the organizations around the world that we end up funding, because we're all in it together. We're all trying to make the same change. We work hard to make sure that our funders are on board with the nature of the change that we're trying to make. And it's systemic change. It's not just providing a service, but it's really looking at why those immediate provisions of service are necessary, and what's wrong with the system that's making that necessary. So, in brief, we are always on the lookout for amazing, innovative organizations. Not always, but typically nascent organizations. Not always, but typically pretty small, and they're run by people who have really, really definitive ideas about the change they want to make. So it's honoring those ideas and not coming in and with our own ideas about what should happen, other than a general idea about how we can improve education for young people in a certain community. We're really there to discover along with the organizations we fund. And the way we fund is also different. We provide flexible funding, and usually with a multi-year commitment. And that's also important because so many organizations, by necessity, jump from project to project, and they never get that core funding to work on themselves as organizations. And we work together with the organizations with that flexible funding, doing organizational assessments in a very, very participatory way that builds trust so that we can determine what elements of an organization's capacity we can work on together. And so we put ourselves on the hook. Once we discover what we want to work on together, it's our job to help the organization do that. And we work hard to establish trust. So yes, we are a funder, and typically from a different country coming in, and we want to be very conscious of the power dynamic that inevitably raises. But we work really hard to establish trust with organizations so they feel free to share challenges, and that's the purpose of the relationship. If there's a challenge within the organization, we're here to work through it, not to say, oh, you have a challenge, we're going to stop funding you. But a very important part of what we do, and it's evolved in recent years, is building networks. So gathering organizations together into cohorts when they're working on a particular issue in a particular part of the world, or working on a global issue that they're tackling and learning about together. And then really working with organizations to broaden, strengthen, deepen the network of organizations, people who are also working on similar issues, so that they can learn, adapt better, and sometimes get together and advocate for greater change. We're an organization that really tries to operate on values, more than rules. So we a couple of years back, we came up with, we went through a process where we kind of shared our personal values and rolled them up into the values of the organization. And it breaks down into things like courage. We extend ourselves and take smart risks that other funders um, aren't willing to take. It's our belief that funding at the grassroots is actually a heck of a lot less risky than funding in very large ways. We embrace passion as a value, kindness and well-being in the organization, and also we work with our partners to kind of center well-being within their organizations and also in the people they're serving. Inclusion is very important to us. The idea that there's innovation and brilliance, exist at the margins. And it's those unheard, novel, divergent ideas that, should be encouraged and celebrated. And, we really look at how, intersections of race and gender and class play into a certain problem, and very conscious of those. And of course, everything we do is in partnership with others. It's really, we're a facilitator and a catalyst. We don't do things alone, and we're embedded in a network of people attacking a particular challenge together. Learning underpins everything we do. We're very curious, and the purpose of what we're doing is generally organizational learning about getting deeper learning about certain issues challenging communities, and undertaking learning activities that help us be a better partner to the organizations we fund. And I touched on some of the big problems in philanthropy and development, and I think you can articulate them in different ways, but a lot of the structures of philanthropy and development go all the way back to colonial times, and are still pursued with that same mindset. It's our money. We think we know what you need to develop economically. So here's a lot of money. Please take it and do what we think will help you. That is problematic in a lot of ways. It doesn't honor the local leadership, and the danger is we kind of slip back into patterns of dependence that are harmful. A lot of philanthropy and development, and I think it's improving, has been very homogenous in leadership. Frankly, people like me making decisions, from places like Washington, D.C., where we're based, and that's changing. This project obsession is another issue that, hey, I want to pay for you to deliver particular outputs and outcomes. And the fact that you need to work on yourselves as an organization, I'm not interested in that. I just want you to, deliver the impact, and that ends up underfunding the goals that everyone wants to achieve in a lot of ways, and can be very tempting to take organizations in harmful directions. Also, one-way accountability. Accountability is not just from recipient of funds to donors, but funders also need to be very accountable to the organizations they are funding, and with an organization on the ground implementing, it's a lot more important for them to be accountable to their communities and to their peers and allies in the work that they're doing, than to be accountable to donors. And all of this has to do with the perceived risk of funding local organizations. We have found over the years that when you take the time to build trust, you take the time to understand the challenges of an organization, and you provide flexible funding, amazing things happen. And our grants are relatively small in the big scheme of things, average $15,000 per year. but since it's flexible, it can be extremely meaningful. And people always ask, well, how do you know they're going to do what you want? Like, well, that's not what I want. I want them to work on, whatever they think is most important. And yeah, there's the question of, well, what if they just go off and don't do anything with it? Well, we've established enough trust up front where that really doesn't happen. And so I challenge assumptions about risk. I think it's a lot less risky to make small grants in large numbers to promising organizations than to flow hundreds of millions of dollars into a project that may not have local buy-in. Um, and again, a lot of decision making has been from the donors and by experts with amazing intentions, but driving projects that are not well suited in particular communities. And then I think related to the lack of proximity, it really is people who are embedded in communities who are uh, more likely to adapt uh, great solutions to the challenges facing those communities. I trust their ideas more than I would trust somebody, examining an issue from far away. Um, and so, all of that being said, and we're trying, not to slip into those patterns. It's hard because we are coming into a relationship with funding. So, like, how do we know we are truly achieving the level of trust that we aspire to? Um, and it's we and right now it's even more acute because um, organizations are under increasing pressure from governments all over the world in various ways. Cross-border philanthropy is becoming more challenging, and everybody has to be very careful about that to make sure we're doing the right things. And so how do we, like, in that kind of environment, is it's just so much more important to act in ways that really honor the local wisdom and leadership. um, but money has to flow and reports do need to be written. So how do we maintain those that security and mutual accountability, without slipping into old patterns that we are trying to disrupt? And so a few things that we do. I mean, first is just acknowledging that the systems on which philanthropy and development are based are rooted in in systems of oppression in various ways. And as much as we're trying to disrupt that, change takes time. But there are different forms of power at play. Yes, money is one form of the power, but who has the power to take a risk? Who has the power to make a decision? And how do you shift those powers away from the people who have traditionally held that power? Honoring local leadership, I've touched on, but that's incredibly important. And then as we look at others we bring into funding relationships or others we work with as peers and allies, we're not looking for people ready to raise their hands and implement our project. We're looking for people who are go on a learning journey with us and with others, together. I touched on debunking kind of traditional conceptions of risk, and that's part of our job, is to really demonstrate by doing that amazing things happen when you take a risk on funding a local organization, that it's actually not a risk at all. Um, and then also recognizing organizations and different forms of capacity they develop. A lot of capacity development in these sectors has been around making organizations into more effective grantees, building financial systems, making sure they're good at reporting. But really, how resilient is the organization? Is the leadership of the organization inclusive? How have they thought about how they're networked with other organizations? there are all kinds of different ways that an organization can become more effective that have nothing to do with being a good reporter to funders. And one of the things we do continually is to seek feedback from the organizations and people we're serving. And we do that in a number of different ways. We're just fielding a major follow-up to a pretty comprehensive survey of our partners in collaboration with a US-based organization for the Center for Effective Philanthropy, so we can kind of benchmark how we're doing in their eyes against how other similar funders are performing in the eyes of their grantees. And then we work we ask our partners more frequently, just for feedback in various ways. And importantly, a key question we ask our partners is, to what extent does GFC do what it says it's going to do? So are we actually, in their eyes, performing well and working with integrity in accordance with the values that I talked about before? So those are some of the ways that we check ourselves to make sure we are actually acting in ways that shift the power and not unintentionally, slipping into old style power structures. And we are absolutely not in this alone. I can share the PowerPoint with the link, but a colleague of mine has been, working on kind of an inventory of all the different kinds of entities, whether it's funders and thought leaders and networks and people who are in this kind of emerging ecosystem of actors, trying to shift the way things work. And we are absolutely not alone in this. And it does seem like philanthropy and development are coming around to this imperative, but not always really equipped to do it. And so part of our job as Global Fund for Children is to demonstrate this in practice. So that's my introduction. My information is here. Happy to connect, happy to get feedback, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, John, for that truly disruptive presentation, and you've really helped us kind of rethink about philanthropy, because I mean, wow, like your idea that how traditionally philanthropy has it's become like transactional, but from transactional you've said you've helped reimagine philanthropy and said that it's about trust, right? It's not just about transactions. So could you help us understand maybe a couple of examples in your experience of how how you've been able to and your team has been able to kind of shift this idea of this philanthropy being transactional and shift it to trust. How does it work? What makes it successful?
Yeah, it comes down to relationships. And so there have been actually instances recently where we've been put in contact with an organization and we've said, no, how would you feel about joining a cohort of organizations, say working against harmful practices against young women in West Africa? And here's what it'll look like. We're putting you together with a bunch of other organizations. We'll have convenings. We'll provide a lot of support, capacity development support. We'll do work with you on assessments. Take you to workshops and provide you with flexible funding. And a couple of organizations, when we approached them with this idea, they thought we were a scam. they, wait, so what's the catch? What are you really offering here? and so it's really conversations and meetings, to explain some of the reasons why we work in this way, because it seems very, very different. And so overcoming some of those fears, like, oh, what's really going on here. It's just one example of that trust building process, because it is really how we do it, and it is actually pretty different. Um, but it's very important, not in every single case, but in most cases, before we enter a relationship with an organization, we have visited in person. In many cases, they come referred by organizations with whom we've got a long-standing relationship. So it's that trust and relationship building process up front that's really key. And that that takes different forms, but the common thread is actually spending significant periods of time together, and most of the time in person, after having done desk research about which organizations are out there, which organizations we've been in contact with already.
Right. John, another powerful point that you made was about shifting mindsets that are traditionally attached to philanthropy from being something that is like it's like patronizing, but more towards trust, relationship building, and this raises also a question about like a philosophical question about like what drives giving in people,
Mm,
like we give because we give to our family, we give to our community that we stay in, but here like you've achieved something which is like giving across borders, right? With no strings attached. uh, for the people who have given, and who have been philanthropists that are working with you, what motivates them to give something which they're not they might most probably might not even know, or not might meet the child or the or a woman or a man on some many countries away. They might never meet that person who they are giving for. But what
mm.
motivates them to give? What would your thoughts be on?
Yeah, the giving motivations are intensely idiosyncratic and personal, but they do cluster in a couple of different ways. Generally, there's some like personal connection with the kind of work they would like to support, and that's why, at least in the kind of United States philanthropy marketplace, you see an enormous amount of giving going to universities where people went or their children are going. Um, uh, Research around diseases that are in a family, religious institutions, so things that are very, very personal. Now, with cross-border philanthropy, um, diaspora giving is really a big driver. So folks who are from a different part of the world find themselves in the U.S. or the U.K. or somewhere else, having been very successful, and really feeling the desire, and feeling good, really good about being able to give back, so that others can have the same kinds of opportunities. So that's also a really, really strong appeal. And I think there's something that has um, really driven a lot of funding through Global Fund for Children, uh, that is an appreciation of the model. So there's a kind of a tech and finance industry mindset that, hey, I like the idea that you're kind of picking these kind of startup-y innovators and helping them grow and kind of expand. And while budget size isn't always the best indicator of success in an organization, um, it's not bad when they average a 300% budget growth in the time we're working with them. That's like one interesting indicator. So there's also that, hey, I want a good social impact deal. I want to be the one who finds that amazing organization, and I can rely on GFC, to do that. Um, and so those are some of the motivations. A lot of our funding that comes from foundations, I think it's really they're exploring a particular issue and feel like they can learn by working with us in a different way. And also, I think increasingly it's institutions and people, responding to these, trends that I talked about. Everyone wants to, fund more locally, but not everybody has the ability to spend the time in communities establishing trust, and we're an interesting and easy vehicle for them to do that.
Thank you, John, for your thoughts on that. Another important point which you mentioned was the idea of risk, right? And you talked about how GFC addresses this question of risk, and you're primarily working with promising organizations which might be very small but have very powerful and big ideas. But risk is, if all ideas that are there would work, then I mean, the world wouldn't have any problems as such, right? So what is the role of GFC in kind of building this bridge between the donors and the implementing partners when we are talking about ideas which are new, which are nascent, which might have worked out in a very small scale. What does that process look like? And starting from the ideation to all the way to the implementation, if you could help us understand how such ideas kind of germinate, and you help them see the face of manifest into reality. Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, it's a big question, and I think you can see GFC as an entity that kind of de-risks organizations for larger and social investments, and that's one pattern. And I think the biggest hedge in my mind against risk is an organization's learning orientation. Um, it's the organizations that make the pivots, and realize, hey, I came in with the idea that I needed to like build a school, and yes, that school needed to be built, but the school doesn't run itself. And even with great teachers and a great facility and great equipment, there are still all these barriers. Why are the kids not showing up? And the barriers will sometimes be different in one community and then the community next door, depending on the conditions. And so what I've observed, working over time, is that iteration, that experimentation, that learning, that wrapping the learning into the next experiment to see what will work. And in one case, it might be, the key, to getting kids successful in this new school that I've now built is actually making sure the grandmothers, who are largely taking care of the kids in this particular community, are making enough money to keep the kids, in school and out of work, or out of the fields. Or in another case, it might be engaging, the kids in yeah, activities around the school that they really want to join, but can only join if they're staying in school and getting the families rallied. And so it's that that iteration process that ultimately, is, if it's present in an organization, they're much more likely to succeed and less likely to either flame out or fail to deliver the impact. So that's really one of the things I look for in an organization. Are they willing to learn? And the way we work, if they're not willing to learn and change, then they're not going to be a good fit. And so, yeah, I sometimes think we should have more partners that spectacularly fail. It would be nice in some cases if they did abscond with some of the funds, because maybe we're not taking enough risk. But I do just generally in my experience, yes, there are some spectacularly awful organizations that exist, simply to make money for themselves. Um, that's absolutely true. Um, but they become easy to spot. It is easy, not easy, but it is possible to spot them and avoid them. And I think we're really good at that.
Right. We also have a question coming from the audience, and um, one of the questions is: do you have any data and research that is systematically built in your work? How do you onboard new partnerships based on trust?
Mhm.
Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, one of the things I'm really keen on is over time, developing a really strong evidence base for this approach. Not just as GFC, but in partnership with others who are also building similar evidence. And we do collect a tremendous amount of kind of baseline data about the organizations we support. How many people they're serving, what their budgets look like. We do periodic. We have an assessment tool, our organizational capacity index tool that we run through with organizations periodically, so we can look at the different dimensions of capacity and how those are changing over time. So we are, and have been, gathering, data that helps us, kind of, navigate what's working and what's not working. But it's challenging because we work with such a variety of organizations in different circumstances, working on different issues in different parts of the world. And so we're also relying heavily on accumulating qualitative evidence through a variety of methodologies, and which center on specific initiatives that we run. And so we have one coming out soon, taking a deep dive into our initiative working with adolescent girls in Central America, um, which we call it a learning review and not an evaluation, because it's something we did ourselves to kind of get a better handle on our own performance. And it's something that we did in close partnership with the organizations that are involved in this initiative, which in turn deployed various methodologies to kind of get a sense of how they're doing. And so there's a whole layer of quantitative data involved in that initiative, which is all very promising. Um, but it's really like the qualitative, uh, uh, kind of evaluation methodologies that start to get at the real changes that occur in organizations and in the communities they're serving. Um, and so, we're not the kind of organization that's relying on a randomized control trial, to build an evidence base for like the GFC effect on organizations, looking at a separate set of organizations that did not experience GFC. But over time, the accumulation of evidence, I think, will be really, really compelling. And the second
Right.
part of the question was about building trust, and I think I touched on that a bit. And it really is focusing on relationships, chains of trust that you develop over time by having strong networks and always being on the lookout for organizations that are potentially fundable.
Right. Thank you, John, for sharing your thoughts on that. Also, another question that we had in our mind was regarding in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen, like, for example, here in India, we've seen that uh, many people have kind of come out to help each other out,
Mhm.
anonymously, also, even people they don't know. There were problems in, for example, oxygen here in parts of India.
Mhm.
So people just went out of their way to just help. If we and you have been looking at this at a global level, in the aftermath of COVID-19, what is your assessment of how has there been any shifts in philanthropy patterns? And do you feel that if there are any shifts, are they kind of there for the long term? Are they here to stay? And what has been the impact of COVID-19 on philanthropy towards education? Your thoughts,
Mm.
please.
Yeah, I think I would. So I don't forget, I'll take this the last part first. Education. Separation from education has all over the world been a huge problem for young people. Seeing as accommodated schools are closed and like trying to do digital with varying degrees of success as family incomes took a massive hit. And very acutely in India. um, it's more and more challenging for young people to stay in school in those circumstances. So they're more and more likely to be married early, they're more and more likely to go back into unsafe work, more likely to be trafficked, and less likely to just be successful in school, even as they are staying connected. That's global problem, looks different in different places, but yeah, I have a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old in very nice public schools here in Montgomery County, Maryland, and it hasn't been easy for them. And that's with a very, very one of the top school districts in the United States. So on all globally, it's a big problem. We've locked in those sort of ripple effects for some time. Though I think the first part of the question, the pandemic has really just illuminated the existing inequities that have existed all over the world. Um, and it's also demonstrated just how important hyper local resilience is, whether it's family to family, whether it's an organization that was working on education but now finds itself in distributing hygiene kits, whether it's a trusted organization working on fighting racism in Peru that now it finds itself trying to disrupt disinformation as a trusted entity in the community, like really telling people the truth about what this is and how to protect yourselves. Again, because these local entities have trust in their communities, they are in many, many, many cases really well placed to disrupt the disinformation, to figure out the immediate needs, and I think that's becoming, it's supporting and accelerating this movement to like really, focusing on community-based initiatives, really funding local leadership, and appreciating how nimble and creative, local organizations are.
Hmm. Right. Thanks, John, for your thoughts on that. Um, and in conclusion, I'd also like to know your thoughts on what do you see is the role of government in the work that you're doing. Because it's truly this is something which you're doing on such a large scale, and it is involving so many stakeholders, not-for-profit organizations, NGOs, donors. So if you, the vision that you laid out right at the beginning about how you see philanthropy, that it's not just transaction, but it's about trust, it
Mhm.
is about respect. Do you think government policy has any role to play to help achieve that understanding of philanthropy? And what are one or two things that governments need to do in order to kind of help achieve that vision for philanthropy?
Yeah, I think it's what I would like to see, and I'm seeing some encouraging movement in that direction, is government changing um, the way it perceives risk and inclusion, and really trying to do things in different ways, which is really, really difficult. And when ultimately you have taxpayer dollars going through a bureaucracy, the risk aversion is real, and but there are but it I think it's government's job to challenge itself to start operating in some different ways, even at small scale. Samantha Power, who's a hero of mine, is the relatively new administrator of USAID here. It's those are the changes she's trying to make. And I think a lot of us are rooting for her because even someone of her stature has a limited amount of time. And we're all hoping that she can pave the way because all the right intentions and people are there to do it. And so I think it's government's job to change the way it works to be more responsive.
Thank you, John, for truly kind of shaking up our understanding about philanthropy and some of the questions that you have kind of raised, and it's really these questions are something that we are going to take back home to understand how we look at philanthropy and giving. And I think like some really powerful statements that you've made, which is relevant not for all people, not just those who give but also who receive. And you're talking about these bringing in new vocabulary of respect and relationships within this. And we've had several stakeholders on the dtalks who have been on both sides of giving, or have been donors, but also people who
Mm-hmm.
are working with donors to implement things. And I think your ideas have been truly powerful, and they're going to trigger a lot of more thoughts and discussion among our stakeholders as well. Truly wonderful and refreshing to have you here at dtalks, John, and we hope to kind of take your thoughts to as many people as possible in the coming time as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.